Scarface, it's a cult classic, right? And it epitomized the Miami cocaine scene in the 1970s and 80s. But what inspired that iconic movie? A new book called Hotel Scarface, where cocaine cowboys partied and plotted to control Miami, focuses on just that and the Mutiny Hotel. In the 70s and 80s, the Mutiny Hotel was a drug-filled playground where dealers, cops, models, celebrities, pro athletes converged, even politicians, you name it. So joining us now with more on the book and the hotel that inspired the movie is the author himself, Robin Farside. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So this is, I think, when you watch Scarface, in watching that scene right there, you sort of get a little taste, but the book describes, I don't know, the epitome of debauchery. It was just wild, Hotel Mutiny.
It was stranger than fiction,
Yeah.
and that's why I did the crazy thing and committed myself to more than 20 years of writing this nonfiction account of how a failed state, effectively South Florida, was a kind of a place where anything went.
Yeah, indeed. And this hotel was sort of the center of it all. It was hotel/nightclub. Really, it was a nightclub, but then it was also a hotel, so people lived there. Drug dealers lived there. There was a tremendous amount of money, weapons, drugs coming through there on a daily basis. If you could give me sort of a 30-second description of what the Hotel Mutiny was like, what would you say?
I would say it was where the cocaine wars crashed into the Cold War, crashed into the savings and loan crisis, crashed into the Iran-Contras, the sexy 70s, reefer madness, pre-AIDS. And it was like our Studio 54. I mean, this was before South Beach had anything going on in Miami. It was really a war-in for retirees, and it's where Grandma and Grandpa would go to spend their late years.
Right.
And so this was the place. It was next door to a recording studio. Celebs would stay there, strong men. I mean, beautiful women would party, plentiful amounts of coke and dom.
And you got some amazing interviews. You talk about beautiful women. There were many beautiful women who worked at the Mutiny.
Right.
You got incredible interviews with them. But also, while I was sort of going through this, I kept on thinking, like, where did he get this information from? How did he find out exactly what they said during this moment when they were about to, walk in with machine guns? Tell me about your research to get this book done.
You have to embed yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I was an immigrant honor student, grew up in Miami, drank milk, said no to drugs, tried to be what Nancy Reagan wanted me to be. And I found this story right before I left for college up north. And when I realized that this was the tip of the iceberg of a true stranger than fiction story, I felt like I had to go in there and over-report it and talk to all sides of the law. I mean, dopers, spies, law enforcement, and try to get texture to tell the story as good as I could. I mean, I have dreams about the place, but I was 5 when most of this happened. So you try to learn from the oral history and fake it till you make it. And hopefully the book is working for people.
There was an awful lot of violence, obviously an awful lot of drugs and drugs being used and abused. When you spoke to some of the people that were at the center of this all, do they look back on this time with fond memories or not?
A lot of them say, thank you for the grace of God, I'm alive.
Yeah.
Because certain people did not make it out alive. Let's not forget, Miami was the murder capital of the United States by 1981. They look back at this time, and it's amazing, kind of like certain investors look back at the internet bubble. I mean, it was just crazy. It was debauchery. Oh, those were the cocaine days. Everything went because everybody was for sale. Anything was for sale. And that's what happens when a town, its Federal Reserve branch, sees a $5 billion cash surplus. Can we get our heads around $5 billion in 1980? I mean, everything, everybody's soul, everybody's property was for sale. And so it's easy for us in hindsight to say, oh, that's like Rome under Caligula. But when you mix cash and power and violence and, 120,000 refugees come into Miami in 1980, many of them violent criminals, something is going to combust.
Yeah, you know what I thought was also interesting about the book? You talk about really the way in which the CIA helped to create this in their training, in the information that they shared with people who they thought maybe they were going to be able to use, whether with the Bay of Pigs attack or the people that they thought were going to be able to help them overthrow Castro. Instead, what they ended up doing was giving them an education they could have never gotten anywhere else. And they just applied all that knowledge, that intelligence knowledge, that military knowledge to dealing drugs.
You have thousands of ticked-off Cuban men and adolescents in the 1960s and 70s who are rearing for a rematch to go out and take out Fidel Castro, and it doesn't happen. And they're saying, all right, while I'm sticking around, might as well get paid. So they move marijuana. It's child's play because they know the coastline. They know evasion better than anybody else. And then pound for pound, cocaine becomes a heck of a lot more profitable. Move cocaine. And by then, the U.S. government couldn't put that genie back into the bottle, that cat back into the bag. In fact, there's lots of evidence, if you look at the John Kerry report in the late 80s, that the CIA was complicit. By then, it turned to looking the other way, salutary neglect, while these guys move cocaine down and arms back and forth with the Iran-Contra crisis. I mean, the United States government, I mean, the CIA, Washington, D.C. broadly really has its fingerprints on the cocaine explosion, sadly.
Yeah, they could have raided the mutiny over and over and over again and come out with all kinds of drugs and guns and, you know, probably charged everybody in there. Why didn't that happen?
It was too valuable to law enforcement to see how everybody interacted, who sent bottles to who was talking to who. There were informants inside the place. Why mess with the place? Why stir up the pot and ruin it? It's like a gorgeous aquarium. But it did get violent. There were shootouts by 1983, and the Miami-Dade police told the owner, you need to sell, you need to get out of Dodge or we're going to shut you down. By the time murder comes into the hotel and people realized it was life and death, that was really the end of it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not even sort of expressing to you all what this place was like. You do such a good job at describing it's sort of otherworldly, where rules and laws really don't apply within the boundaries of this hotel.
And that's what happens in certain air pockets of history, whether you look at ancient Rome under Nero and Caligula, you look at Deadwood in the Gold Rush, you look maybe some things that happened in the United States, the bootlegger 1920s. There are times where you have to kind of give up on all social conventions because anything goes. And that's why, I mean, it's just stranger than fiction. One of the main dopers, who looks a lot like Tony Montana, is driving around town with a chimp, wearing a gold chain and a Cuban cigar. And people look back on that and it's like, oh yeah, that was Mario's chimp. I was like, what do you mean? You know? Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
That is so true. That is so true.
As Rick James once said.
And he was also a frequent guest, right?
He was a frequent guest. He was a freaky guest, too, we're told. You know, unfortunately, freebase and crack. I mean, the polish comes off of this. This is very high culture, high functioning, high concept when you're talking about Dom Perignon and powdered cocaine. But when it's repackaged and the price of cocaine has fallen in the 80s, and you get much more of a New Jack City situation, an entire parts of Baltimore, Trenton, Miami, Charlotte, going down the tubes very quickly. It's an American tragedy.
Yeah, really. It's a great book. As I started reading this halfway through the first chapter, I thought, God, this would make a great TV series, and it's going to be.
Yes, we'll be coming to TV. Hopefully, we have a deal with Stone Village Productions for a premium limited cable series. So fingers crossed. I had to leave so much on the cutting room floor that I'm excited to kind of bring it to 4K life, you know?
Well, the book's out there for everyone if they're interested in learning a little bit more. Robin Farzad, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.